Sign up today and get $20 in free play. No deposit necessary, New Jersey only. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. We're happy to welcome back the CEO and creator of Knicks Fan TV, CP, and also happy to welcome back Jonathan Wasserman, who's the lead NBA scout and draft analyst for Bleacher Report. And we're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. And you can get involved in the comments section throughout this entire stream. But as always, we tip things off with the baseline. Ian, Leon Rose and company entered their second draft with the Knicks holding the 19th and 21st overall pick. For the first time in a quarter century, the Knicks have two first-round picks within the top 21, but they also don't have a top 10 draft pick like recently. So Obi Toppin, that is, last year, RJ Barrett 2 years ago. So considering all of this and where they finished last year and the complexion of the roster, how important is this draft for the franchise?
It's interesting because they have those two first rounders, but so many people around the league don't think they'll end up making both picks because of where this roster is. You know, they're coming off of that 41-win season, and it's a crowded roster. And, you know, people just wonder, is there room for 2, 3, 4 rookies on this roster going into next season? And that's why teams for weeks now have thought that the Knicks would get off of either 19 or 21 when it was all said and done.
And CP, I'm going to ask you the same line of questioning. So they have the chance to move up, but how important, what are your thoughts going into this year's draft night and what it means for the Knicks franchise as they look to build themselves into a consistent contender?
Well, there's an opportunity cost to winning. And as much joy and elation we had watching this team, you know, make the 4th seed and make the playoffs last year, it slides them down further into the draft. And you know, when you look at the Mavericks, who the Knicks own their first round pick, they ended up playing a lot better. So the Knicks landed the 21st pick in the draft. So while it's not a death sentence, it certainly puts the onus and the pressure on this Knicks front office, the scouting department, Walt Perrin, Scott Perry, the GM, to, you know, maybe try to find a diamond in the rough if they stay within that area, that range of 19 to 21. Can they find a diamond in the rough? You know, we know Walt Perrin's resume includes Donovan Mitchell with the 13th pick, Rudy Gobert at 27, guys like Paul Millsap at 47. So if they stay there, you hope the scouting department, you know, finds a diamond in the rough, or are they able to move up, package the 2 picks, move up into the late lottery? Maybe that's an option. But either way, they have some flexibility, and you hope that whether they stay put, trade up, or trade for a veteran, it's somebody that can help move the needle a little bit for this team going into the next season.
Yeah, if they do stay put and they find a diamond in the rough, hopefully, you know, they find somebody like Emmanuel Quickley, who had such a big presence for this team unexpectedly. And Jonathan, we'll get into specific players throughout the show, but how would you rate this overall draft class, specifically number 1 through the Knicks at number 21?
Yeah, there's more optimism about this class than there was last year, particularly at the top. You know, last year people weren't sure about whether LaMelo and Anthony Edwards and Wiseman would be stars. I think there's a little more certainty, I guess, when it comes to Cade and Mobley and Jalen Green and Jalen Suggs, which really makes up the first tier. And I think there's this idea that you want to get into that top 4 to get your franchise player. But, you know, like I was talking to a scout yesterday about who's going to be available in the 20s, and there are some pretty good names who could easily have a lottery case maybe in another draft. And so teams are feeling pretty good about this draft. And I think we're actually finding out to trade up. The price is pretty high. Even just to get like the 13th pick, you have to give up a lot. So teams feel pretty good about this draft, and the prospects will be available to them regardless of where they're picking.
Yeah, that just makes the drama, the potential for drama leading up to draft night that more likely. And once again, we'll write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on, and we'll get to them throughout the show. And Ian, mentioning, or, you know, going back to the topic of trading up in this draft, you've done a lot of reporting, so has Jonathan, so have several others, about the Knicks potentially moving up in this draft if they get a player, or if they want to get a player that they really like. And it feels like we've been talking about this for ages, so I'm glad that it's finally almost here, just a couple hours away. What's the latest on that front with the Knicks potentially trading up?
Yeah, I know they checked in with Washington, and so Washington, I believe, has the 15th pick, and so New York was looking to get that pick. I don't know if those talks kind of gained any traction, but they've been kind of canvassing things ahead of them to see where they can move up. I know Jonathan had some reporting on that as well. I think that if they move up, they have eyes on Chris Duarte from Oregon. And I know that Corey Kissbert, is also on their radar as a shooter, but I don't know if they can get that far up. Also, Trey Murphy III, he's got some fans in the organization. So there are several options there if they were to move up. And this is the game, right? You try to figure out where the team ahead of you is going to go with their pick, and you try to figure out where you have to get to if you have a guy that you're targeting ahead of your own pick. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out over the next couple hours.
So, Jonathan, with that being said, what teams and spots specifically should Knicks fans keep their eyes on as far as where they could trade up to?
It sounds like the Pacers pick is available, or at least they're fielding a ton of calls, which makes you think that they're listening and they're waiting for the best possible offer. And so 13, as Ian said, 15 makes sense. I heard that Golden State turned them down for their 2 picks at 14. I'm assuming the Warriors don't want 2 more picks. They already have 7. And so, then if you're the Knicks, like what Ian said with Washington, how much do you want to give up to move up 4 slots? And how much do you really want a guy like Duarte or Trey Murphy, who I think most I talk to think Trey Murphy will be there at 15, unless maybe the Spurs surprise people. And so, it really depends on how badly you want a guy like that. And it sounds like Washington or Indiana would be the 2 teams that they're probably talking to most.
All right. Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes on that for sure. And CP, under what conditions should the Knicks trade up or not trade up? Like, where would you say, we don't need to do that? Or it's like, we need to pull the trigger to make sure we get our guy like a Duarte or, somebody else.
In the event they trade up, there are a couple guys I'm looking at in terms of just having higher ceiling potential. And one of those is Moses Moody, the shooting guard out of Arkansas. Give you some nice shooting from the mid-range, can get to the line, draw contact, has some length to give you some nice defense. Also, James McKnight out of UConn, another guy with high athleticism, some nice ball handling, should profile as a scorer at the next league. Guys that may have borderline star potential. If they're there, I think the Knicks should entertain trading up there. I also like, as Ian had pointed out, Corey Kissbert out of Gonzaga, help us there from the 3-point shooting and capable defender as well. So those would be, some of my targets if we were to trade up. And, if we stay at 19 and 21, I think we have some depth there in the draft that we'd be okay with where they select.
Right, exactly. And maybe, who knows, they don't have to trade up to get their guy, and that would be a great situation for them. And before we get into more specifics, we want you to know what you think the Knicks should do in the first round tonight. Should they trade up? Should they go rogue and trade back, or should they simply stay with the picks 19 and 21? Go to sny.tv/vote now for this week's fan choice presented by 888 Casino. Sign up today and get $20 in free play. No deposit necessary, New Jersey only. All right, Ian, you mentioned a couple of names earlier on. One of them was Chris Duarte, the guard out of Oregon. Jesse Gaber is asking, Duarte's 24. Is he really the right guy for this team?
You know what? I would say yes, only because this team, the way they played last season, coming off 41 wins, it doesn't seem to me like they're in the mode where you draft an 18-year-old and you give that player a 3-year timeline and you hope for the best. Seems to me like they're more on the timeline of, hey, let's get players in here, pieces in here that can help us today because we want to continue this momentum that we built last season. We don't want to backslide. So, I don't see Duarte's age as a big impediment towards the Knicks taking him. I know he's got some fans high up in the organization. So it's going to be interesting to see how much the Knicks would be willing to give up to move up there. I mean, Jonathan, I think, would agree that he's not likely to fall down to 19. So they would have to take a big jump up to get there. But you knew that they liked him because when they worked him out, I think it was last Friday, can't remember, but it was a solo workout. It was just Chris and it was execs and coaches. So they wanted to get a really good look at him. So that tells you all you need to know about their interest level in Chris Duarte.
Yeah, it's very high. And I think he would fit very well into a Tom Thibodeau coach team, given his abilities, on offense with the 3-point shot and also on defense. And Jonathan, Duarte averaged over 17 points a game last season for the Ducks. What is the scouting report on him from Oregon?
He's tough. He's a shooter and he's tough. and he's got the size to defend and the mentality to do it. I think the question is whether the creation will translate, whether he's athletic enough and quick enough with the ball to be a one-on-one guy and to be someone you put in ball screens and give him the ball and make things happen. So I think teams see a high floor because of the 3-and-D, but he graded out really, really well as an ISO guy, as a pick and roll guy. And so, he's pretty skilled and he can attack, he can shoot off the dribble, he can spot up. He's very well-rounded. And so it's tough to really pinpoint any hole in his game. In fact, the biggest weakness everyone says is he's 24 years old. And I think maybe at 13, 14 in the draft, that doesn't matter so much. Just like we saw Cam Johnson come off the board at 11 and play a nice role. He was 23 years old when he was picked and play a nice role for Phoenix. So I think you start to not worry so much about upside once the top 5 or so guys are off the board. And so you could see why he's enticing to teams who are looking for an immediate contributor, and particularly with his brand of shooting and defense, which everybody needs on the wing.
Yes, absolutely. And CP Duarte was not only all Pac-12 last year, but also was Pac-12 all defense. And do you see Duarte as a good fit for the Knicks roster, the way it's currently constructed?
Yeah, I think he'd be a great fit. As Ian said, where we are right now, I think having a guy that you can plug and play would be an ideal fit versus a project. And when you look at Duarte, 42% from 3, 69% effective field goal percentage off the catch and shoot. I think he'd be a great outlet for Julius Randle and RJ Barrett. The fact that he can potentially attack closeouts as well, so not just be a spot up shooter, but a guy that can attack closeouts, attack hard defenses and knock down shots from the mid range. I think that'd be excellent. When you look at the versatility of like the Hawks that they had with their wing players, I think having a guy like that can put the ball on the floor, attack those closeouts would be ideal. And he is 24, but I believe Watts had said it on my show that, if you're getting that type of value from a rookie who can come in and give you that type of production, on the free agent market, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So I think Duarte can certainly help us.
And it would just also relieve some of the pressure and the responsibility, with Julius Randle and RJ Barrett, so they wouldn't have to shoulder as much of the load. And Jonathan, let's talk about another guy who's, somebody that's been talked about a decent amount is Corey Kissbert, the forward out of Gonzaga. What's the scouting report on him?
He can shoot. That's pretty much the scouting report. He is a knockdown shooter but there's more to his game. And he's probably not going to be a guy like, I think Duarte has a little more creation potential to his game, whereas Kissbert is mostly catch and shoot off screens. He was actually the most efficient transition player in the country, which he doesn't get enough credit for. But he's also just, he's got a really high IQ for a supporting role. And so it's just an easy plug and play guy with a translatable skill and the mentality to be that supporting role player. So he's an easy fit for anybody. And again, everybody wants shooters, and he's one who can give it to you right away.
And what about Virginia guard Trey Murphy III? He spent his first 2 years at Rice before transferring to the University of Virginia. How does his profile fit on the pro level?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, he was 43% from 3 and 92% from the free throw line. He didn't get there much because he doesn't put the ball on the floor often. But at 6'9", he's athletic around the basket. He can attack a closeout in a straight line. And defensively, while I've heard mixed things about whether they think he can guard wings, I think he can. And so with his size and length, if he's able to guard wings and then at 6'9" stretch the floor, then, again, another easy fit. I don't see a ton of upside, and I know there's a lot of buzz with him, and I'm told it's real. I heard yesterday from an executive he can go 10 to 15, and it doesn't sound like he's going to get past Washington, and I guess that's where the Knicks would have to trade up to if they really want him. Again, I think the appeal to him is his floor. He's just like a safe pick and another really smart, likable kid who's crushing these interviews. And so I think that's where he's at right now. People just see an easy role player, easy fit.
Right. Okay. And Ian, Trey shot over 50% from the field last year for UVA compared to 43.7% this time with Rice. What's your intel on Murphy III?
Just, you look at his length and you look at his age. He's not the youngest guy, obviously, but just what he was doing at Virginia, he may have been limited there. I mean, he may be able to do more than he showed at Virginia. That's what people around him say. His trainer, Sean Farmer, is adamant in saying, like, once you space the floor out, once you get on a bigger court and spreads out, he'll have more weapons and he'll be able to do more things. And that's the difficult part about projecting college kids, international players to the NBA game. And, college coaches are always saying, let him get into the NBA spacing and see what he can do. But I think that would ring true with Trey Murphy. So it seems like he's a very solid prospect. And then you look big picture with the Knicks. I mean, even if they stick at 19 and 21 and they make those picks and even 32, yes, you have a ton of rookies on your roster. But if the goal here eventually is to bring in a star and you think you can do so via trade, those players are going to be valuable in trade talks. So just something to note as we move forward here, even if the Knicks do keep those picks, opposing teams, like talking about those guys when you talk trades.
Right. And we also have some news from Adrian Wojnarowski reporting that the Nets, Landry Shamet, is going to the Suns for Javon Carter in the 29th pick in tonight's draft. The Nets now have the 27th and 29th pick. So, Ian, what do you think about that whole trade that just went down between the Nets and the Suns?
Yeah, there have been a bunch of teams that were interested in Landry Shamet. Lakers were among them. New Orleans was among them, and Dallas. And so the Nets, I think what they saw was Shamet is extension eligible, and they have so much money tied into the big three, and they're going to have such an expensive luxury tax bill that this was a tough move to make, but a necessary one. And so now they have an extra draft pick. They have Javon Carter. So this was, something that teams felt was inevitable, whether it was before the draft or after the draft. And so now the Nets, I think they have to find a way to bring a shooter on. I don't know if that's via the draft, trade, or free agency, but there's a lot of things up in the air. In Brooklyn, this was one of the dominoes that plenty of people expected to fall before the draft. And the Knicks, they had some interest in Shamet going back to last year when they were talking to the Clippers about a Marcus Morris trade. So I wonder if they touched base with the Nets on it. A lot of teams were checking in on it. And so Shamet to Phoenix, and Brooklyn gets another first.
Yeah, it's surely to be one of the first of many trades in tonight's draft. And Jesse Brooks, CP, is on Twitter asking, who's the top realistic point guard to target in the draft for the Knicks?
Well, you got to go with Sharif Cooper out of Auburn, a guy who a lot of mock drafts had him being taken by the Knicks. As Ian has said in multiple reports, the Knicks have done extensive intel on Cooper. I think, as an undersized guard who doesn't shoot the ball as well, there are some concerns, but obviously, his playmaking wizardry is something that I think the Knicks could use. Looking at this team, a very isolation-heavy team, when you look at what Julius Randle had to do to carry this offense last year, be great if you could have a point guard that could help him get easier buckets, help RJ get going as well, help us in the pick and roll game, which Cooper can do. Can he get Mitchell Robinson going, Obi Toppin going with the Gotham lobs? So I think if Cooper was on the board for the Knicks, he'd certainly be the top point guard for them.
And Jonathan, CP touched on, a lot of Sharif's, strengths, but when you look at his film and based on what you've seen, how would you evaluate him for the next level?
I'm a fan of Cooper. There are non-believers who question his size for defense, his athleticism for finishing, and his shooting for scoring, which I understand. But I think as CP said on your show, passing translates, and he is an awesome passer with both hands, and he's got the elusiveness and the shiftiness and the handles to put himself in playmaking position often and make those passes. And so I think you have to really say, as his coach, be like, listen, just focus on setting up teammates, because that's what he does better than maybe anybody in this draft. I mean, not many guys in college average 8 assists a game. And so I think if you keep it simple for him and make him focus on creating easy shots for teammates and setting the table, then he could hold a lot of value to this particular roster. But yeah, there are obvious concerns about his scoring upside in terms of, can he make shots from the outside and can he finish around the basket?
Yeah. But they definitely need somebody who can facilitate and create plays, for the rest of the stars on the team. So they would, if they got him, that would be a good pick. And I just got a notification, Ian, that Shams is reporting a trade between the Lakers and the Wizards. Well, they're engaged on a trade. I should be very specific about that, for Russell Westbrook. So if this goes down, what do you make of all that?
Well, I think it'll have ramifications for the Knicks because I know as part of those discussions over the past few days, week or so, Dennis Schroeder was a name that had come up between Washington and LA. I know at one point there was a third team involved, but I think primarily you're looking at like a Schroeder sign and trade for the Lakers to get Russell Westbrook. And you're also looking at maybe Taylor Horton Tucker going over in a deal. So big ramifications for both the Lakers and the Wizards. But if you're the Knicks, you're looking at Schroeder, and that's a point guard that's off of the free agency wheel. And I don't think the Knicks were ever like they had Schroeder on their radar. There was some support, but I think that as the season went on, it kind of waned. So I never got the impression that he was right there for them as a free agent target. But certainly it's a point guard that's off the market, and that's impacting the way the Knicks can move and will move in the point guard free agency coming up in a couple of days.
Yeah, lots of potentially moving parts in the NBA right now with the NBA draft only a few hours away. CP, what do you think about if that trade went down and how it would impact the Knicks, as Ian just mentioned?
Well, what I'm wondering is Bradley Beal. How does that impact a potential Bradley Beal move? You know, I'm sure he can't be happy with the Wizards taking a step backwards here. Will he hang on and head into free agency 2022 where we could, have a realistic shot at him? I would love to have Bradley Beal on this team. And so certainly a blockbuster move on the way. Obviously the Lakers, always get their guy. But my target is Bradley Beal, man. I hope we can land him next offseason.
Ian, is that likely? Like, what do you think about a potential Beal to the Knicks? I know we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves, but these things do have ramifications for the years to play out or the years to follow.
Yeah, it is certainly a part of the landscape here, and some teams had kind of speculated that Bradley Beal was waiting to see what Russell Westbrook did. Where is Washington going to trade him, and maybe that would put him closer towards asking for a trade. The tough thing with Bradley Beal, at least at this point, is you are trying to engineer a trade on draft day, less than 3 hours before the first round kicks off. So it would be tough sledding for Washington to get a deal of this ramifications done before the draft. But there is a connection there. Teams had mentioned that connection. So it's something to keep an eye on. And then when you talk Beal to the Knicks specifically, I think that it wasn't a part of the equation in a serious way on either side, maybe going back to the beginning of last season. But, I think one thing the Knicks did this year, winning those 41 games, they put themselves more on the radar of players like Beal. If they may ask out, then I think that those kinds of players would more seriously consider the Knicks now than they would have dating back to last offseason.
Yeah, because they've now become, a more attractive destination in contrast to previous years in the previous regime. But Ian Begley will have full coverage of the Knicks tonight, whatever they choose to do in the draft. So follow his coverage on Twitter as well as on SNY.TV. Then tonight at 11, Ian will join Geico Sports Night to recap all the Knicks draft decisions. So be sure to watch that all night and all morning on SNY. Jonathan, I'll go to you, because I've kind of been heavy on CP and Ian the last few questions. If the Knicks do stay put and they don't trade, who are they eyeing?
Well, I heard yesterday that Deuce McBride from West Virginia and Bones Highland from VCU were in a small group of guys that they're targeting. In fact, there was an executive picking around where the Knicks are who told me Bones Highland at 21. And so we'll see if that happens. Bones, my comparison is quickly. And so you could see, maybe they said, we saw the success of a pull-up shooter and a deep range shooter like Quickly. And Bones is 6'3". He's not a point guard, but he can make shots. And, the Knicks are looking for shot making on good value deals and guys who can do it quickly. Not to say quickly again.
No pun intended.
But yeah, Bones is like a great kid. Like everybody is going to love Bones in New York if this actually happens. And by the way, McBride also a perfect fit for the Knicks is a guy who really defends, one of the peskiest defenders in this draft, but he really improved his shot making. And so between his shot making and his defense and his speed, another easy fit and really likable player.
Ian, are you hearing the same names at 19 and 21 as Jonathan, or do you have something different?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jonathan because I kept hearing about the big from Kentucky. Excuse me, I just get something out here. Jackson. So I kept hearing that I don't know if he's going to be there for them, but if he was there, that would be the guy that they're seriously considering. Had you heard similar things? Because that's what I've been hearing for, past couple of weeks. And the connections are obvious. Kentucky, William Wesley, Knicks top exec, ties to the Kentucky program. Leon Rose ties to the Kentucky program. Kenny Payne, obvious ties to the Kentucky program. So maybe that's why I kept hearing it, but it seemed to be something real.
Yeah. I mean, people bring up Jackson. I don't know if it's because they have inside information or they're just assuming that he can play with the connections, and throw in Noel as a free agent, and Mitchell Robinson is injury prone with a year left on his deal. And Jackson's supposed to go right in that range. I think he'll be there. I do think he'll be there. He's very similar to Mitchell Robinson in terms of his strengths and limitations. He's a lob target, a finisher, and an active shot blocker, and not somebody who's going to put the ball down or really look at the basket if he's 15 feet away. And so, I think at number 21 in the draft, that's fine. But I don't see a lot of offensive upside with him, but clearly a very active defender. And if he could control his fouls like Mitchell, then he could be a pretty effective rim protector.
So a guy similar to Mitchell Robinson, CP, how do you feel about that for the Knicks?
Well, I do think we need to look into the backup five spot, because I don't think Noel will be brought back, or else I wouldn't invest that type of money in a backup five. We do need to address it. Bringing in another, Mitchell Robinson with limited offensive upside, I don't think I would go there with 21. I think I would keep it on the perimeter. I like the profile of a Deuce McBride, defensive intensity, improved shot making there from West Virginia, a safe pick there. And then, go with some more offensive upside. Bones Highland wouldn't be a bad selection. A lot of people like the quickly comparisons. I see a little Jamal Crawford, a little microwave scorer out of VCU there. My pick is Trey Mann out of Florida.
Okay.
Bucket getter, 6'4" bucket getter. I would certainly roll the dice on him. And so, I think we have some good options there. I wouldn't necessarily go with Isaiah Jackson that early at 21 for the Knicks.
Okay. All right. I don't blame it. And of course, guys, free agency begins next week, and the Putback will have you covered. Be sure to check out the Putback with Ian Begley, free agency special Monday at noon, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching us right now. Ian and I will once again be joined by CP as well as Ashley Nicole Moss. So it's going to be a great and fun show. All right, Ian, when it comes to, we talked a lot about, how some of these players would fit in defensively. So how important is defense when it comes to the Knicks evaluating prospects and making a selection for this year's draft?
We know that Tom Thibodeau has a significant voice in the room when it comes to these decisions, and we know how much Thibodeau values defense. So you can surmise that defense is a large factor when it comes to what they do or don't do tonight and moving forward. But, the Kissbert interest, to me was intriguing because, I know that he was one of the guys that they had on their board if they were to move up, and he's a shooter. So to me, that tells you that Thibodeau also values offense and knows the Knicks need shooting. I mean, he was coaching this team. He saw it firsthand that there was some lineups where there was just not a lot of floor spacing. So the Knicks need a floor spacer. And so I think about Kissbert when he asked that question, but certainly generally, defense is going to be a priority for this club. And interesting thing to me is Reggie Bullock, he was such an important part of the Knicks defense last year, defense that finished, I think, 4th overall in defensive efficiency. If he goes to another team, how do you replace that, and how does that impact your defense moving forward? Just something to think about as we get closer to the draft and free agency.
And when we look at the point guard position, do they absolutely, the Knicks that is, do they absolutely need to draft a point guard tonight?
No, they don't need to. I mean, it would be helpful if the best player available happened to be a point guard. And I also don't know what their plans are in terms of going after free agents. Like if they're set on offering Lonzo a big deal or Lowry a big deal, or somebody that I'm missing, then you definitely don't need to go after a point guard. But I think you got to take the best player available is just kind of what I always say. And hopefully it's a point guard. And I think the best players available, there'll be a couple of them who are happen to be point guards. So I'm a McBride guy. That's the guy who I would Excuse me. That's the guy who I would hope that he'd choose.
You're getting choked up there, because
Yeah,
you're very emotional about him. You got
It is very, very near and dear to my heart.
yeah. CP, what do you think though on that same subject line? Do they need to draft a point guard here, or do they need to focus on the best player available, like Walt said, and focus about the point guard in free agency and forward?
Well, I mean, it's certainly frustrating that we haven't addressed the position long term in the last 10 years. It's certainly been frustrating to see that. But I'm with Waz. I think we got to go best player available. We need as much talent as we can get on this roster. If Cooper, man, fall into that slot, then let's go for it. Because I do feel like they need to at least get one into the system and start to groom the future. But on the flip side, the Knicks have flexibility. I do believe that even if they go with a point guard in the draft, they'll still bring in a veteran point guard to start, at least in my view, in what Tibbs wants. And so could it be Lonzo? Could it be a Lowry? Is there outside shot at a CP3? I think, with D Rose, does D Rose come back on a veteran deal? I think they have some options there, but, I would like to see them address the point guard position at some point.
Yeah, they got to, because this has been going on for way, way too long. And Elfrid Payton was not getting the job done. And
Not at all.
Derrick Rose is great, but he isn't Derrick Rose from Chicago. Ian, I'll ask you, when you look at this draft, regardless of what they do, the Knicks do in this draft, how will that impact, or what should be their top priorities during the free agency period?
Yeah, lead guard. I mean, I think that's regardless of what happens tonight. I think it's lead guard is one of the priorities. We reported the other day that at least one key decision maker with the Knicks has embraced the idea of going after Spencer Dinwiddie. So I think that'll be something that we'll see more of probably over the next few days once free agency starts. I think that'll be a target, unless, I don't think Chris Paul is going to be available. Everybody that I've talked to thinks he's going to go back to Phoenix, and that's that. But if Chris Paul somehow becomes available, then that changes the conversation. But I know Dinwiddie is on the radar for them at lead guard. Obviously, for the Nets, they would, if you're going to lose Dinwiddie, you would want to do a sign and trade, I would think. The Knicks, they'll have the cap space to sign him outright. And I do know that there's one other team, and it's not the Knicks, it's not the Nets, but it's a team that I think struggled last year, but they have a offer that they are prepared to call Spencer Dinwiddie's agent on Monday night and make that offer. It's just a matter of Dinwiddie accepting that or going elsewhere. So a lot of balls up in the air, but I think the priority there is point guard, and then you look at shooting after that.
For sure. All right. So our producer's saying we've been rapping for way too long, so we got to wrap this up. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to ask you guys one quick prediction for the Knicks tonight. Wasserman, I'll start with you, and then we'll go CP and then Ian.
I think they'll wind up with Bones Highland. That's just a gut feeling. I think he fits their culture and what they're looking for. And so, Bones is my prediction.
What about you, CP?
Well, I'm hoping they get lucky and Trey Murphy falls. Maybe Zaire Williams is Patrick Williams of this year's draft, moves up and slides everybody down. So I'm hoping Trey Murphy 19. I'm hoping Trey Mann at 21 and Quentin Grimes 32. If they keep up.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be tough to trade up. So I think it's most likely that they end up sticking. And I think one name that'll be on this roster, whether it's 19, 21, 32, is Isaiah Jackson. So that's my prediction. I think it's less likely that they move up than staying there. So I think that's a safe bet right now.
Yeah, for me, I think they go with either, they stay put. As you guys mentioned, might be hard to move up, but I think they get a guy like Sharif Cooper from Auburn. And then obviously I'm a big fan as well, Wasserman, of Bones Highland. So I think those two players would be really great assets for the Knicks team. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Jonathan Wasserman for his incredible perspective on the NBA draft, and CP of Knicks Fan TV. A pleasure as always. Once again, we will be back Monday at noon on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels for our free agency special. For Ian Begley, I'm Chris Williamson. Thanks for watching the Putback. Keep it locked on SNY and SNY.TV for all of your NBA draft coverage.